The Premier League is considered the best football league in the world. The best players play for the biggest clubs who have the biggest fan bases, and they all compete to be crowned the champions of England's top flight. But who is the biggest team to have never played in the Premier League? I've chosen 4 teams that I would consider to be the biggest clubs to have never played in the Premier League since its inception in 1992. And now, I know football existed before the Premier League, before anybody starts commenting that. And yes, some of these clubs have played in what was considered the first division back then, but none of them have yet since played in the Premier League. Now, the first club I'm going to be talking about is Plymouth Argyle. Located down on the south coast of England in the county of Devon, Plymouth were founded in 1886, and there's 2 really main theories as why they have Argyle in their name. One is that they were named Argyle after the local regiment football team called Argyle and Sutherland Highlanders, or they were named after the street on which they were founded, which was Argyle Terrace. Now, Plymouth Argyle have mainly spent the majority of their history floating between the 3rd and 2nd division of English football. They've never actually played in the 1st division. In terms of major honours, they haven't won any. They did feature in an FA Cup final after beating a highly rated Derby County team in a replay at the baseball ground, but apart from that, there's only really been some lower league trophies sprinkled in there, as well as some promotions from those divisions down there, and there's not been any major honours. The next club is Bristol City. They currently play in the Championship, the 2nd division of English football. They've played in the 1st division before in the 1906-07 season, and they almost won it. They finished 2nd behind Newcastle United. During this period, they enjoyed a short period of on-the-field success. In 1909, they played Manchester United in an FA Cup final, but unfortunately they lost that one. Throughout history, similarly to Plymouth Argyle, they've always found themselves in the 2nd and 3rd division of English football. More recently, they finished in the playoffs in the Championship as they were knocking on the door of the Premier League, and probably enjoyed their most on-the-field success in a number of years. The third club is Millwall, the London-based team that were founded in 1885. Now, they have played in the top flight before in 1998 to 1990, but they've not returned since. They did feature in an FA Cup final in 2004, which they lost to Manchester United, but because Manchester United had already qualified for the Champions League, Millwall had the opportunity to play in Europe. Unfortunately, they did get knocked out in the qualifying round, and most recently they finished 8th in the Championship, knocking on the doors of playoffs, and had a real attempt at a playoff push in this second half of the season. And now the next club is one of the founding members of the Football League in Preston North End. They were founded in 1863. They also have a number of major honours to their name. They were the first ever club to do what's considered the double in winning the league and also the early version of the FA Cup. They've won the 1st division twice, as well as another FA Cups. They've won 2 FA Cups. They're also the first ever team to go invincible. Before Arsenal, they went a season undefeated in that year when they won the Cup and their league, and they also didn't concede a goal in their FA Cup run when going on to win that, which I think is a pretty superb stat to have. However, in the 1960-61 season, they were relegated from the 1st division and have been unable to return ever since then. They featured a couple of times in the Championship playoffs, but never winning them, and most recently they found themselves sort of mid-table mediocrity in the Championship. Now, out of those 4 clubs, who is considered the biggest team to have never played in the Premier League? Now, obviously there's a bit of a difference in clubs as I went down that list. You've got Plymouth Argyle, who never featured in the top flight, have never won a major honour, and then you go down to Preston North End, who've won 2 1st divisions, 2 FA Cups, but haven't been in the top flight since 1960-61. And you could argue that Plymouth Argyle's fan base at the moment is probably a little bit bigger than Preston North End's, and that's what we're going to be thinking about and talking about today. I think I want to consider the fan bases of these teams at the moment, because I think that's important when thinking about the size of the clubs. What's the average attendances that these teams get? How well travelled are they away from home as well, and what's their away support like? And when we look at all those things, it comes in that Bristol City have the highest average attendance, the most recent. Fortunate all these 4 teams were in the same division last season. Bristol City had a home attendance on average of around 22,000, which is a pretty decent home attendance at the modern Ashton Gate Stadium, which is a stadium which, having been to it, almost feels like it's knocking on the door of the Premier League. It's a modern stadium, one that I could imagine that if Bristol City got promoted, they wouldn't look out of place in there. And obviously most recently they were in the playoffs looking for that promotion to the Premier League, but unfortunately were knocked out in the semi-finals. And you've got Plymouth Argyle on the other end of that, who were most recently relegated from the Championship. They suffered with some financial problems a few years ago, which meant they went from the Championship down to League Two, but they've climbed their way back up. Obviously, they're going to find themselves in League One next season, but they did have a 2-year spell in the Championship, and they're a club that have made a lot of developments on the pitch as well as off the pitch since their financial troubles. The redevelopment of Home Park brings that a lot of character into the stadium. It's an old-fashioned stadium, which you can tell when you visit it, but it's got that modern touch to it, and I'm a really big fan of it. I think it can generate a really good atmosphere, and one that's electrifying when you watch the games that they've had in most recent times, when they've beat Liverpool at Home Park in the Cup most recently. And they're a club with high average attendances at home, selling out most weeks, and you have to take your hats off to the away supporters of Plymouth Argyle fans, who are travelling that 3 to 6 hours most weekends whenever they've got an away game to go and support their team. And I would say Plymouth Argyle are some of the best travelled fans away from home, and so you have to give credit to that. But then, as you say, they're a club which have never featured in the top flight. They're a club which have never just made it, even though you look at the catchment area in terms of the players in the academy that they should be able to bring. It's massive, with only really Exeter City being in our way, another team that would challenge them for those players. But we then take into consideration Millwall Football Club. Millwall, a club with a lot of history, a big reputation, a team that has played in the top flight, but a team that have struggled to really solidify themselves in that second division. I would say they featured a couple of times in the playoffs to bounce back to the top flight, but I think in more recent years they've sort of bounced between the lower end of the second division in the Championship and that top end of League One, always being successful in bouncing back and climbing back out of that League One. And as you said, they've reached an FA Cup final and competed in Europe, which not many clubs who've never been in the Premier League have been able to say that they can do that, being a club that reached the FA Cup final whilst being in a lower division, obviously losing out to Manchester United. But who is the biggest club out of those four? And if I was to give my opinion on that and make a judgment on that, I think historically it'd be hard to argue that it's not Preston North End, one of the founding members of the Football League, a club steeped in history, having won 2 First Divisions, 2 FA Cups, got invincible as well. But at the moment, I don't think, in terms of the size of the club, that they're really there. I think, like I mentioned, they're in the mid-table mediocrity. So I think at the moment, in terms of what we're talking about now in the context, I would go Bristol City, the biggest club never to have played in the Premier League. For Bristol never to have had a Premier League club as a city, it's hard to believe when you look at it. Obviously, it's a 2-club city with Bristol Rovers as well. I'd say a little bit smaller than Bristol City. But you look at the developments Bristol City have made in recent times, both off the pitch and on it, like I mentioned. The redevelopment of Ashton Gate was a massive step up in becoming level with that top end of the Championship and bottom end of the Premiership clubs in terms of the stadium facility that they have. The away end's fantastic. Bristol City's a fan base is continually growing. That Section 82 in the corner generates a really good home atmosphere, and something that we're seeing more and more in English football. And the away end is fantastic as well. Whenever you watch those match highlights and you get to see the away end scenes, they're always brilliant at Ashton Gate. And I think with them enjoying the on-the-field success of reaching the playoffs first time in a number of years and being that close to the Premier League, I think in 5 years' time it'd be really interesting to see where Bristol City are as a club in the future, and maybe they have tasted the first joys of the Premier League. But what do you think? Let me know down below. I think Plymouth Argyle are a really interesting club to look at. I would say Millwall and Preston North End are very similar in that they do have history, but they've not really made any major steps going forward, I think, in recent years. That's only my opinion based off the football that I've seen from both teams. If you do agree with me, let me know down below, and what you think, who is the biggest club to have never played in the Premier League. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.